Hello, it's Keith here again. We're going to be beta testing again today. We're still on the Amstrad CPC because we've got another system to do. Today we're going to be doing the CPC 464. Now the CPC 464 is a more limited version than the normal version of the game. Because of the memory limitations of the system, some of the content is scaled down. I'll be talking through that today as we play the game, but if you're not familiar with my game and you really want to see it at its best, please don't take this version to be the sort of baseline. Please see the CPC Plus version, which I'll do next, or the 6128 version, or the MSX version, or whatever. So as I say, don't take it that this is showing the game at its best, but this is a realistic playthrough of the game on the Amstrad CPC 464. Now, one thing to say is the CPC 464 comes with only an internal tape drive, but the game is not coming on cassette. It's a multi-loader game, it's a heavy multi-loader, and even worse, on the 464, because of the memory limitations, whenever you hit the continue screen, it actually has to reload the continue screen. So as I say, there's various limitations on it, and it doesn't work on the internal cassette. Now you may wonder why I'm actually supporting the 464 if that limitation is in place. Well, there's really one main reason. I actually grew up using the CPC 464, but the system I had I got from my dad, and he had originally purchased it for work purposes, so he'd bought the disk drive fairly early on. So when I took it over and I started using it for learning to program, I always had that disk drive with me, and when I wanted to start programming the ChibiAkumas game, I wanted to write a game that would be the kind of thing I would have played as I grew up. So I sort of aimed it as the minimum system being the CPC 464 with the external disk drive. So anyway, enough talking, let's get on and have a look at the hardware with the overhead camera. Okay, so here's the hardware we'll be using today. This isn't the original one I had as a child, so it's just similar. So it's CPC 464, means it's got 64K of memory, cassette deck, which as I said, we won't be using today. This is the later model, the cost down models, I think it's sometimes called. It's the printed circuit board is half the size, so all of the ports are squashed up at this one side here. So you got a single joystick port, volume out, printer port, external device port, which is called floppy disk port, so that's what we'll be using today. A monitor out, which we'll be using with our VGA cable, one of those VGA cables with the arcade converter. 5 volts in, no 12 volts on this one. Volume control, power button, and the part that the courier in the UK broke, and I had to glue back together with super glue. Well done, UK couriers. So, nice basic system. Got the nice colours, which are always nice to see on the Amstrad CPCs. I really do like those sort of bright colours. So yes, now as I said, I've got the RGB plug here, which will be doing our graphics work. For the floppy drive, I'm not using a real floppy drive. Apparently the DD1, I think it's called, the Amstrad CPC floppy drive is very rare now and expensive. We're using this emulator, it's called the Zaxxon. A specky symbol on there for some reason. Now this actually emulates the HXC that I have used in the past. It works exactly the same as a HXC, it's just got these extra chips because the Amstrad CPC 464 doesn't have enough built-in hardware to control a floppy drive on its own. The real Amstrad CPC with that DD1 drive, the drive had an extra plug-in board, and that was actually the ROM itself that controlled the floppy drive. Now this has a rather special feature. It's got these little switches here, and if we set the switches, we can actually set this to emulate PowerDOS, which is the superior ROM, which has support for larger disk drives, 3.5-inch floppy disk drives and things, or just the basic Amsoft ROM, which is the default one. We're going to use the basic Amsoft one because that's kind of the more tough one to support. Most of my testing was done with PowerDOS, so we're going to emulate this as close to as we can to a real CPC with the external floppy disk drive. Now this is a HXC, but unlike my other one, it doesn't use SD cards, it uses USB sticks, but the functional procedure of getting data onto them is identical. Plug it into your PC, use the converter. If you've not seen that, please see my Spectrum Plus 3 video, and we just convert the disk images, put them on here, plug them into this when this is in the back of the machine. And for power, we only need 5 volts, so I'm just using these, which are just 5 volt lines, 3 amps. So there we go. So we just need to gently put this on. There we go. We've got reset and next and previous, just like the other one. And this does have the LCD display, so I can see quite nicely what I'm doing. Okay, so then we'll just plug this in here. Plug our VGA cable in. And just position things so I can plug my power cable in. So there we go. And everything comes on. So let's move the cameras over and have a look at the screen. Okay, so let's start the game then. So as I've said, we're using a disk emulator just like the HXC one. Now this one doesn't actually have an internal speaker, so you won't hear any sounds of the disk loading, but you can take it from me, it works the same. So we don't get any sound at this point, but it is loading as normal. A few things that have changed today. I've not plugged in the speakers for my for my TV, so we're actually going to use the internal speaker just for a change. Also, I'm not using my 3-button joystick today. The CPC 464 can support it, but I thought for a change I'll use keys. So that's what we're going to do today. So you should immediately notice that the font is different, and again this is a memory limitation. There simply wasn't enough system resource to have that special font, so we're using the system internal font. So that's why the game looks different. And so let's start things up. Now the gameplay of the CPC 464 version is identical to the 61281 one. All of the limitations are graphical. This was done by design. I didn't want the game to have any limitations that would make the game easier or harder to play. Now, one of the major limitations you'll notice is I've just started the game in 2-player mode, but you'll notice we now have 2 Chibiko characters rather than Chibiko and her brother, which, you know, that's not right. What's going on there? And again, the limitation is the second bank of sprites for the second character are loaded in the 128K memory, so on the 64K systems there's simply no space for that second character. So on the 464 version, you can still play in 2-player mode, but you cannot play as the 2 characters, so you get this kind of mirror mode dual Chibiko character play. Now, if you look at the enemies as well, you'll notice they're not animating. Usually they have 2 frames of animation, and on this version they don't have any animation. Again, this is the limitation. On the 6128, the extra sprites are loaded into one of the extra banks of memory. On this version they do not. Now the other thing that you will probably see fairly soon is, as I've already mentioned, when you die you get a more simple continue screen, and also you don't get the game takes longer to load. On this 6128 version it won't load as the continue screen shows, but on the 464 version the continue screen does have to load in, and that's because, again, here you go, loading. You would hear it if I had a speaker on my virtual floppy drive here. But as I say, the game does play exactly the same, and all of the differences are cosmetic. There's no difference in speed, there's no difference in gameplay function. It's not like the Hostages game where you are missing a full level. You'll get the same feel, you just won't have the graphical niceties. But I think, you know, the game still looks pretty good. The background is identical, all the background details there, and again that was intentional. You see, if I'd have made the background simpler, then the 464 version would have actually been potentially faster than the 6128 version. And while I wanted the game to work on all the systems, I didn't want an unfortunate situation where the 6128 version was much slower than the 464 version, and people were unwilling to play the superior 6128 version because of the speed difference. So all of the enhancements are in favour of the 6128. And none of the stuff that's been removed would make the game play any faster or play any easier. It's all cosmetic, and that has been quite seriously tough to do in places. You know, especially with the second game, the last boss used 256k of memory, used a huge amount of memory, and trying to design a boss battle that could be done on 64k or 256k was quite a challenge, because, you know, it had to really work the same. All of the functional requirements had to be possible within that 64k. So, and again, here's the boss, and as I've said, everything will pretty much look the same. It just doesn't animate on the 464. But, you know, you're probably thinking, well, that's a bit disappointing. Well, let me just explain to you a little bit of how the 464's memory is actually split up on the Amstrad. Now, the screen on the Amstrad CPC is 320 by 240 of 4 colours, and that means it uses around 16k of memory, almost exactly 16k of memory. Now, ChibiAkumas is a double buffered game, so what it's doing is it's showing one screen while it's drawing the second one. So that 16K of memory is not the entire screen. It's actually using 32K for those two buffers. Now, if you think about it, 64K system, 32K gone, we're down to 16K. That's a bit of a problem. But it gets worse. Now, you've got the sort of music, which is 4 kilobytes. Sorry, I'm just trying to think and play is a bit tricky sometimes. So anyway, so yeah, you've got the music, which is about 4 kilobytes. You've got the sound effects, which is 1 kilo. Sorry, just getting confused. I'm giving you the wrong figures here. The music's 1 kilobyte. The sound effects is 256 bytes. The gameplay data, the data for the stars and the objects and things, that's a couple of kilobytes. And then you've got this thing called the core. Now the core is all of the functional data which does the main operations of the game. For example, drawing the sprites, moving the objects around the screen, reading the level data, handling the players being killed all the time. Things like that are all in the core. And that's 8 kilobytes on its own, you see. So the long and short of it is the core, the sprite, the music data, the player sprites, the game level data, all of that added together is another 16K. So that only leaves 16K left of the system memory for everything else. And by everything else, I basically mean the level data. So the sprite, the background graphics, the sprites of the level data itself, which says, oh, well, this object's got to move across the screen at this time. All of that is within the 16K. Now, not all of the levels use the 16K, and most of them don't use it all. But you see, the thing is, the game, yeah, when I was designing the game, I kind of had to design the last level when I was doing the first one, if you see what I mean. You can't rewrite your entire game every level as you think things through again. So, yeah, the game engine is designated with 16 kilobytes of memory allocated to the level data, and you know, if the level doesn't use it, well, there's a bit spare, and if the level uses it all, well, great. And if it needed more than that, well, I'm sorry, but you've got to redesign that until it uses 16 kilobytes. So that's how it worked when I was designing the game and how the levels work. The last level uses all kinds of crazy stuff, you know, this huge bullet array, and it also uses compiled sprites for the background, so that does use all the 16K, but a lot of the other levels won't. Most of them won't. But as I say, you can't redesign, you can't, oh, well, I'll load in the extra player sprites on the third level because the third level isn't using all the 16K. That's going to be a nightmare to debug and to test. It's really not going to work nicely. So as I say, you kind of have to make assumptions and allocations in the early days to end up with a game that works properly and is easily testable. So that's how it works. Now, anyway, I was saying about the core and the level data, and those are 32K, and the also the two screen buffers, which are another 32K. Now, there is another thing you need to consider with that. There is another important module which makes up the game, and that's something called the bootstrap. The bootstrap is what's running right now. It reconfigures the system, it loads in levels, and it also shows the continuing game over screens. Now that is another 16K module, and it doesn't actually stay in memory. That's why when the continue screen shows, it has to reload. On the 128K system, it does stay in memory when it is paged in as required. But on the 464 that we're using now, it's actually about 8K in total. It actually loads into the second screen buffer area, because when the continue screens are showing, both screen buffers aren't functioning. And that's another thing to just think about when you're sort of looking at the 64K version and the 128K version. Things like the game over screens, the introduction, they don't use the second screen buffer. They're only using a single screen buffer, and you may see graphical glitches like sprite flickering and things that you don't usually see. And the reason is the second screen buffer isn't being used. And the reason the second screen buffer isn't being used is because I needed that extra 16K for the large sprites, the large bitmaps that are shown during the introduction. So rather disappointingly, the 128K version is being slightly limited by the 64K, by maintaining compatibility with that 64K version. And you know, I mean, you could say, oh well, you know, you could reprogram it in such a way that it works with both and it uses the buffers differently depending on the hardware that's being used. And the truth is, yes, probably I could. But the thing you've got to bear in mind is the testing of this game is an absolute nightmare already. I mean, I'm frankly sick of playing it now. I've been playing this thing for 2 solid months, just testing, not programming, just testing. I've been playing it morning, noon, night. I've been playing it on one system, then another, then I find a bug, I fix the bug, and guess what? Well, the game code's been changed, maybe another bug's come in. So you just have to play it all the way over again. And so as I say, there becomes a point where you have to just make sacrifices, make compromises, just to create a viable game, unfortunately, because, you know, we've all got limited time and limited ability, and if you aim for a game that is just too complex for your time you can allocate to it, or too difficult for you to debug, you'll just never finish anything. So in the case of this, I have made I've made compromises on the 128K version for the 64K version, but it has kept this 64K version working pretty nicely, I think, and it also has given the benefit of it has made it a lot easier to support the systems like the ZX Spectrum and the MSX, because the code is basically designed around a very low memory limitation, effectively of 32K. If you deduct the screen buffers, the game only requires 32K of system memory. Anyway, we've finished now for the main version of this video, so thanks for watching. My Patreons are actually going to get a little bit more, where I'm going to discuss what I've been working on the week in my video blog. So anyway, everyone else, thanks for watching.